What makes a man never forget a woman, even long after she's gone? It's not always the curve of her body or the heat of a night they shared. It's something deeper, something quieter, something most people don't see, but once it happens, it marks a man for life. We often talk about intimacy as if it's just about what happens between two bodies, as if physical connection were the peak of closeness. But real intimacy, the kind that carves itself into memory, the kind that lingers even when the sheets have cooled, isn't just about bodies. It's about what was touched inside the soul. There are men walking around today appearing strong and untouched, but quietly haunted by a woman they once knew, not because she was perfect, not because she said all the right things, but because with her, something rare happened. He was seen, maybe for the first time, and that kind of seeing, it stays. There's a kind of intimacy that goes far beyond sex. It's the intimacy of being known, without masks, of being allowed to unravel, of letting your guard down, and not being punished for it. Most men grow up with the unspoken rule that strength means silence, that showing emotion is weakness, that vulnerability is shame. So when a woman comes into his life and offers something different, a space where he can breathe, speak, collapse if he needs to, he doesn't forget her. He may move on. Life may change. Years may pass. But somewhere in him, she stays, because she didn't try to possess him. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't ask for perfection. She simply created space for him to be who he was, and she met him there. That kind of intimacy, that kind of emotional safety, it's rare, and rare things are never forgotten. She made eye contact that didn't just glance, but lingered, as if trying to memorize the language of his silence. She asked questions not to judge, but to understand. She listened with the kind of focus that makes even a broken man feel whole, and perhaps the most powerful thing she did was stay present. In a world where most people are distracted, half there, and already thinking of what to say next, she stayed right there with him. She was not a fantasy. She was not a prize. She was a mirror, one that reflected not just who he was, but who he was allowed to be. And that, more than any touch, more than any kiss, leaves a lasting imprint. When people ask why he still remembers her, he might not be able to explain. He might say, she was just different. But deep down, he knows. She touched something no one else did. Not because she tried harder, not because she played games or seduced him with tricks, but because she showed up as herself and gave him permission to do the same. There is a kind of intimacy that doesn't need noise to be remembered. It doesn't need drama or fireworks. It's quiet, but its echo lasts a lifetime. Some women leave perfume behind, others leave chaos. But the woman who touched his soul, she leaves peace, and peace, real peace, is unforgettable. So what makes a man never forget a woman? It's not how she moved in bed. It's how she made him feel in silence. It's the way he could fall apart in front of her and still feel worthy. It's the way she saw his wounds and didn't flinch. It's the way she held space, not for who he pretended to be, but for who he really was. And that, more than anybody ever could, is what makes intimacy unforgettable. Every man has a version of himself that the world sees, and a version he hides. He wears the mask of strength, of certainty, of confidence. He walks into rooms with his head high, his voice steady, his smile perfectly in place. But underneath it all, there's a part of him that's tired, that's unsure, that's aching to be seen without armor. And the truth is, most men never take that armor off, not because they don't want to, but because they've learned it's dangerous to do so. He's been told all his life, be strong, don't cry, don't talk too much, don't feel too much. He's been admired for what he accomplishes, not for who he truly is. He's learned that love for him often comes with expectations. Perform, provide, protect, but don't you dare fall apart. So when a woman enters his life and offers something different, a safe place where he can be real, it shakes him to his core. He may not even realize it at first. It might just feel like ease, like comfort, like not having to try so hard. But slowly, without even knowing it, he starts to open. He starts to tell stories he's never told. He starts to laugh in ways he hasn't laughed in years. He starts to speak not from a script, but from the raw, unfiltered truth. And in that space, something powerful happens. He begins to feel human again. She doesn't rush to fix him. She doesn't react with judgment when he shares something dark. She doesn't shrink when he shows his shadow. Instead, she listens. She holds space. She makes it clear, you don't have to be perfect here. You just have to be honest. That kind of acceptance is rare. And for a man who's lived decades performing performing a role. It's like being seen for the very first time. He may have had other lovers. He may have known passion, even obsession. But this feels different. This feels safe. And when a man feels safe, truly safe, he lets his soul breathe. That's what makes her unforgettable. Because with her, he didn't have to impress. He didn't have to prove anything. He could be messy. He could be confused. He could be scared. And still, she stayed. She didn't demand that he always be the rock. She didn't need him to have all the answers. She didn't idolize his strength or depend on it to feel secure. Instead, she made room for all of him, the bold and the broken. And that kind of woman, she becomes more than a memory. She becomes a place inside him, a quiet space he can return to in his mind again and again, when the world feels too loud, even if they part ways, even if life takes them in different directions, even if time erases the details of their conversations or the scent of her hair. What remains is the feeling. That feeling of being real, of being enough, of being loved not for what he could give, but for who he actually was. Some men spend their whole lives craving that kind of connection and never find it. Others find it once and hold on to it forever. Because at the end of the day, no matter how strong a man appears, he is still human. He still longs to be seen. He still aches to be understood. And the woman who gives him that, who meets him in his truth and doesn't flinch, she becomes the soul he never knew he needed, and the one he never truly lets go of. Some women are unforgettable not because they made noise, but because they didn't have to. They didn't demand attention. They didn't beg for love. They didn't chase or compete or try to outshine. Instead, they left something far more powerful behind: presence. There's a kind of woman who walks into a man's life quietly, but leaves like a soft echo that never fades. She doesn't overwhelm. She doesn't try to prove her worth. She doesn't need to be the loudest person in the room. In fact, many times, she's the one simply sitting in silence. And yet somehow he can't stop thinking about her. She's unforgettable because she didn't need to be anything more than herself. In the world that teaches people to fight for attention, she chose another path: authenticity. And that authenticity, that simplicity, that ease, it stays. Because with her, he didn't feel pressure. He didn't feel pushed. He didn't feel like he was performing or being evaluated. He just felt. There was something in the way she looked at him. Not a look of possession, not one that said, "You're mine," but one that said, "I see you. I'm here." She didn't need to prove that she was better than the rest. She didn't need to be perfect. She didn't chase. She didn't compete with his past or compare herself to someone else. She knew her worth, and that quiet confidence spoke louder than any words ever could. And the most powerful part, she didn't try to leave a mark. She simply was the mark. It's not always the boldest love stories that are remembered. Sometimes it's the ones that felt the most peaceful, the ones that brought stillness to chaos, the ones that made breathing feel easier, the ones where nothing had to be forced and nothing had to be fixed. She didn't flood his phone with messages. She didn't make demands or ultimatums. She didn't show up just to be seen. She showed up to be fully and presently. And in that presence, he found something he didn't even know he was looking for: rest. Yes, rest. From the pressure to impress, from the noise of the world, from the weight of being enough. With her, he could just exist. And that kind of space, that kind of peace, it's priceless. He may not talk about her often. He may not say her name out loud. But late at night, when the world quiets down and there's nothing left but thoughts, he remembers her. The way she listened, the way she smiled without trying to charm, the way she let silence fill the space without rushing to cover it up, the way her energy lingered in a room long after she had left it. He doesn't remember her because she made a scene. He remembers her because she didn't have to. She was the kind of woman who brought calm instead of chaos, who made him feel grounded instead of dizzy, who gave him space instead of taking it. And in that quiet, she gave him something he didn't expect: clarity. The clarity that real connection doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to shout. It doesn't have to beg to be kept. When something is real, it stays. Not because we force it to, but because it simply fits. Some women scream to be noticed, others whisper, and are remembered forever. Because the woman who doesn't need to shout to be remembered is the one whose soul he'll always carry, long after the world forgets her name. There is something profoundly intimate about being truly heard, not just listened to out of politeness, not nodded at while the other person waits for their turn to speak, but really, deeply listened to, where the silence between words is just as loud as the words themselves, where someone hears what you're saying and what you're not. Most men don't get that kind of listening. They get conversations filled with expectations, dialogues that feel like performance reviews, responses loaded with advice, criticism, or dismissal. Over time, they stop saying what really matters. They talk about the weather, about work, about things that are safe, and slowly they forget what it feels like to be vulnerable. Until she came along. She didn't just hear his words, she heard him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to finish his sentences. She didn't jump in to fix or judge or offer cliches. She listened, and with eyes, with heart, with presence. And in that quiet attention, something in him softened. He could say things he had never said out loud before. He could pause without fear of being rushed. He could fumble through his emotions without being shamed for it, because she wasn't just hearing the story. She was holding space for the soul behind it. And in a world where men are often reduced to providers, protectors, achievers, that kind of space feels like freedom, like finally being seen as human, not just useful. He could talk about his father, about the nights he felt like a failure, about the guilt he carries, but never names. And she didn't look away. She didn't tighten up or shift uncomfortably. She leaned in, not just physically, sir, but emotionally. She made it safe for him to stop performing. That's what real listening does. It tells a man, you don't have to be impressive right now. You don't have to say it perfectly. You don't have to hide. I'm here with you for real. And in that space, a different kind of intimacy is born. One that doesn't need sex to feel close. One that doesn't need drama to feel alive. One that grows not from attraction, but from understanding. Because long after a man forgets the words that were spoken, he remembers how he felt when he said them, and how she made it feel okay to speak from his soul. It's easy to be with someone who wants to talk. It's rare to find someone who knows how to truly listen. And the woman who listens like that, she becomes unforgettable, not because of what she said, but because of what she allowed him to say. When a man finds that space, that safety, that stillness, where he can be entirely himself without fear, he never forgets the person who gave it to him. Because in a world full of noise, the deepest connection is made in silence. When two souls meet between words, and one heart says to the other, I hear you, I see you, you matter. There are touches that thrill, and touches that heal. Most people think physical intimacy is about pleasure. And yes, the chemistry, the desire, the fire, they all matter. But when the body speaks to the heart, it goes far beyond the mechanics. It becomes a language, a kind of sacred communication, one that doesn't need words to be understood, because the soul already knows. There are women who know how to touch a man's body, and then there are women who know how to touch his being. She was one of those women. With her, intimacy wasn't a performance. It wasn't about expectations or roles or pressure. It was about connection. Real, deep, grounding connection. She didn't rush. She didn't play games. She didn't make it about impressing. She made it about feeling. Every moment with her felt like presence. Every kiss was intentional. Every embrace carried a message. You are safe here. She didn't just want his body. She wanted to be close to who he was. She wanted to hold him where it hurt. She wanted to explore not just his skin, but his stories. And that kind of closeness, it's unforgettable. With her, he wasn't just touched. He was met. It wasn't about the position or the performance or some movie scene fantasy. It was about the way their breathing synced. The way she looked at him like he was more than enough. The way her hands moved with care, not urgency. The way she paused to feel, not just to finish. That kind of intimacy lingers. Because for the first time, perhaps in a long time, he wasn't just a man being desired. He was a man being held, not just by her arms, but by her energy, by her stillness, by the love that lived behind her touch. And what made it powerful wasn't just what she did, but how she was. She didn't see intimacy as something to give or trade. She saw it as something sacred to share. There were no masks between them, no scripts, just raw presence. Two people, skin to skin, yes, but more than that, soul to soul. And in that space, something rare happened. He felt whole. Not because she completed him, but because she reminded him of everything that was already there, waiting to be loved. She didn't just ignite his desire, she awakened his tenderness. She reminded him that being soft was safe, that letting go wasn't weakness, it was freedom. Long after the moment passed, her touch remained, not on his skin, but in his memory, in his breath, in his quiet moments of solitude. Because when someone touches you at that depth, you don't need to see them again to feel them. You carry them. Some connections fade, some burn fast and disappear. But the woman who touched not just his body, but the parts of him he thought no one wanted, she leaves something behind. Not regret, not obsession, but reverence, a gentle, wordless knowing. She knew me, and she touched me like I mattered. And that is the kind of intimacy that no one forgets. Every man has known the weight of being someone he's not, just to be loved. He's been shaped by silent expectations. Be stronger, be smarter, be more successful, be more emotionally available, but not too emotional. He's been told directly and indirectly that he needs to improve, fix, or evolve in order to be worthy of love. So, he adapts, he molds himself, he tries. Sometimes, he becomes a version of himself he doesn't even recognize, all in the name of love, until he meets someone who doesn't want to change him. She doesn't treat him like a project. She doesn't see him as potential. She doesn't subtly correct his behavior, compare him to others, or push him toward becoming someone else. Instead, she meets him exactly as he is, and that kind of meeting, it's rare. Because so much of modern love is built on the silent contract, I'll love you once you're better, but not her. She loves what is, not what could be. She sees the beauty in his flaws, the story in his scars, the strength in his silence. She doesn't try to fix what's not broken, and she doesn't call broken what's simply different. With her, he breathes easier. He doesn't feel like he's auditioning for affection. He doesn't feel like he's walking on emotional eggshells. He doesn't feel the pressure to perform, to impress, to constantly prove he's evolving. He simply is, and that's enough. And when a man is given the freedom to be, something miraculous happens. He grows, but not out of pressure. He changes, but not out of fear. He becomes more, but not to keep her. He becomes more because he feels safe to unfold. She's not passive. She has her standards, she has her voice, but she doesn't lead with criticism. She doesn't disguise control as love. She invites him into his fullness, not by demanding change, but by loving him into it. She doesn't say, I'll love you when you finally open up. She says, I'm here whenever you're ready. She doesn't say, you should be more like this. She says, I love who you are. That kind of presence rewires something in a man's heart, because most of the time, when he's been asked to grow, it came with shame, it came with ultimatums, it came with a message that he wasn't enough. But she brought love, not condition, curiosity, not judgment, acceptance, not pressure, and in that environment he bloomed, not perfectly, not instantly, but genuinely. He opened up, not because he was forced to, but because her love gave him space to feel safe doing so. He softened, not because he was told to, but because she never mocked his softness. He tried harder, not because he feared losing her, but because he wanted to honor what they had. That's the paradox. The woman who doesn't try to change him ends up inspiring the deepest transformation, and that transformation lasts because it came from within. Years later, he may still remember her, not just as someone who loved him, but as someone who allowed him to show up, to be raw, to be real, to be himself, unfiltered, unedited, unafraid. And that kind of love, it doesn't just heal a man, it frees him. Sometimes it's not the grand declarations that leave a mark, but the smallest moments, not the gifts wrapped in ribbons, not the dramatic surprises, not the words shouted in passion. No, what he remembers years later are the quiet gestures, the ones that asked for no applause, the ones that felt simple on the surface, but said everything. She didn't need fireworks to show affection. She didn't need to post about it or announce it to the world. She just did things, small, thoughtful things that made him feel seen, like remembering how he takes his coffee, or texting him something random that reminded her of an inside joke, or folding his shirt with more care than she used on her own, or brushing the hair from his forehead when he was tired without saying a word. These are the gestures that seem ordinary until you realize how rare they are, because behind each small action there was presence, there was love, there was attention. The kind that says, I notice you, I remember you, I choose you. That kind of attention is powerful, not because it's loud, but because it's real. And for a man who spent much of his life being valued for what he does, being cared for in the small details feels revolutionary. It's not transactional, it's not strategic, it's not love with a condition. It's love that simply exists in the unnoticed corners of the day. She didn't need to prove anything. She didn't didn't ask for recognition. She just gave from a full heart without keeping score. And somehow those moments etched themselves into his memory, not because they were big, but because they were honest. Because when she made him tea without asking, it wasn't just tea. It was her saying, "I see you're tired." When she left a little note in his bag, it wasn't just paper. It was her saying, "You're not alone." When she fixed the pillow behind his back, it wasn't just comfort. It was her saying, "You matter to me." These things might not seem like much to the outside world, but to him, they were everything, because every time she did something small, it planted a seed in his soul. This is what it feels like to be loved without trying to earn it. And that's what made her unforgettable. She made the ordinary feel sacred. She turned the routine into connection. She brought softness to the hardest parts of his day. So many people are chasing the big gestures, the viral moments, the grand stories to tell. But the truth is, the things we remember most often aren't the things that made us cheer. They're the ones that made us feel safe. The woman who touched him deeply wasn't the one who made the biggest scene. She was the one who made the smallest things matter. And because of that, she stayed in his morning coffee, in the song that played when they drove in silence, in the way he now notices the quiet acts of care around him because she taught him how. And maybe years later, when someone asks, what made her so unforgettable, he won't be able to explain. Because how do you explain that a simple gesture, a glance, a smile, a touch, can leave fingerprints on your soul? There's something sacred about laughter, and something even deeper about silence. When a man shares both with a woman, without fear, without effort, something rare begins to form. A bond that isn't built on perfection or performance, but on presence. On a feeling that says, you can be fully yourself here. With her, he laughed in a way that surprised even him. The kind of laughter that starts small, then tumbles out uncontrollably, that bends the body, makes the eyes water, and suspends time for just a moment. The kind of laughter that heals more than any advice ever could. And it wasn't because she was trying to be funny. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real, effortless, organic. She brought lightness to his heaviness. She turned his guarded seriousness into playful ease. She didn't laugh at him. She laughed with him, and sometimes for him when he forgot how. And in that laughter he felt something open, because so often men carry the weight of the world quietly. The stress, the fear, the pressure, all of it locked behind a steady face. So when she made him laugh, even about the dumbest, smallest things, she wasn't just making him smile, she was unburdening him. Even if just for a moment he could let go. And that's the kind of relief a man never forgets. But even more unforgettable was the silence. Not the awkward kind. Not the kind that begs to be filled. The kind that felt safe. They could sit in a room together, not speak for minutes, sometimes hours, and not feel the need to explain it. The silence wasn't a threat. It wasn't distance. It was comfort, like an unspoken agreement. I'm here. You're here. That's enough. And that's rare. Because silence often feels dangerous in relationships, like something's wrong, like someone is hiding. But not with her. With her, silence was a kind of music, gentle, steady, honest. There were moments when they laughed until they cried, and other moments when they cried without saying a word. Both were held with the same tenderness. She knew when to speak, and she knew when to simply sit beside him, to offer her hand, her eyes, her heart, without needing to fix or change a thing. That's what made her unforgettable. She didn't fear his silence. She respected it. She didn't try to drag him into the light when he was in the dark. She simply sat with him there until he was ready. And because of that, he never felt alone, even in the parts of himself that had always felt too much or not enough. They laughed about the little things, the burnt toast, the clumsy mornings, the inside jokes no one else would understand. But they also shared the heavy truths, the past hurts, the family scars, the questions with no answers. And in both, she remained present, grounded, steady. That combination of joy and depth, of silliness and sacredness, is rare. It's the kind of connection that doesn't happen every day. It's the kind of intimacy that outlasts romance, desire, even time. Because when a man finds someone who can hold both his laughter and his silence, he doesn't forget her. Even if life moves on, even if they lose touch, even if the world pulls them apart, he remembers the sound of her laugh and how it made him forget his pain. He remembers the stillness in the room and how it made him feel understood. Because the woman who meets both the light and the shadow in him doesn't just touch his heart, she becomes part of it. A man never forgets the woman who let him be himself herself. But there's something even more powerful when she was herself too, not a version shaped by fear, not a mask crafted to please, not a carefully edited performance of who she thought she should be, but her, fully, authentically, unapologetically. It's easy to get lost in roles, especially in love. The role of the perfect partner, the one who agrees, the one who sacrifices, the one who hides her feelings to keep the peace, the one who performs femininity or coolness or sensuality, depending on what the moment seems to demand. But he didn't fall in love with a role. He fell for her, in all her rawness, her honesty, her light and shadow. She didn't try to be perfect, and that's exactly what made her unforgettable. She cried when she needed to. She laughed loudly, sometimes at things he didn't even understand. She admitted when she was scared. She owned her desires. She had bad days, and she didn't pretend not to. But through it all, she was real. She didn't hide her opinions just to be liked. She didn't dim her passion to seem easier to love. She didn't apologize for taking up space, emotional or physical, and in doing so, she gave him a rare gift, the truth. He saw her, not the polished version. He saw the messiness, the contradictions, the beauty of a human being who wasn't pretending, and instead of that pushing him away, it pulled him in, because when someone shows you their truth, they invite you to show yours. With her, there was no pressure to keep up an image, no unspoken game of emotional poker, no pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. She brought honesty to the table, and it tasted better than any fantasy. She didn't pretend to always be confident. She didn't need to be endlessly cheerful. She didn't package herself for approval. She simply was, and that being created space for both of them to rest in reality. And in that reality, intimacy was born. Not the kind based on attraction alone or shared interests or physical desire, but the intimacy of truth, meeting truth. She could say, I don't know. She could say, that hurt me. She could say, this is what I need. She could say, this is who I am. And even if he didn't always understand it immediately, he respected it because it meant she trusted him enough to stop performing. And trust like that, it leaves a mark. Years later, he may forget the details, the places they went, the clothes she wore, the exact words of their late-night talks. But he'll remember the feeling of sitting across from someone who was entirely herself, who didn't twist, shrink, or polish herself into something more palatable, who invited him to see the real her and didn't flinch when he did. That kind of woman doesn't just leave memories, she leaves a model for what real connection looks like, a reminder that love isn't built on perfection, it's built on presence. She was imperfect, she was alive, she was herself, and that truth, that courage, that radiant honesty, that's what stays. Some women leave quietly, but they never really leave. You don't see them in your life anymore. You don't hear their voice in the hallway or feel their hand resting gently on your chest at night. But somehow they're still there, in the way you pause before speaking, in the softness you now allow yourself, in the echoes of a connection that touched something deeper than skin. Because intimacy, true intimacy, never really fades. The body forgets, time moves forward, new people arrive. But when a woman reaches into the center of who you are and touches it without fear, without pressure, without conditions, she becomes part of you. She may no longer share your mornings. She may not respond to your messages. She may be a name that others have forgotten, but not you, never you. Because with her, something rare happened. You were seen, you were felt, you were known, not for what you had or what you did or what you showed to the world, but for who you are when all of that is stripped away. And in that sacred space, something bloomed, a quiet knowing, a sense of peace, a recognition that yes, love like that is real. She didn't leave a trail of chaos. She didn't leave you broken. She left you aware of what love can feel like when it's safe, of what touch means when it's honest, of how silence can be louder than word, and how presence can heal more than promises. You might look back and wonder what went wrong, why she left, why it ended, why life moved you in different directions, and maybe those answers will never come. But something in you will always whisper, whatever it was, it mattered. Because some people enter your life to remind you of what's possible. They don't stay forever, but their impact does. And every woman who touches a man's soul in that way becomes unforgettable, not because she tried to be, not because she clung or demanded or chased, but because she loved fully, freely, bravely. She didn't just leave memories, she left change. You love differently now. You listen more. You speak with more care. her. You recognize presence. You crave depth because she showed you it exists. So when people ask, why do you still think about her? You might just smile. Because how do you explain the kind of intimacy that never really ends? How do you put into words the way someone taught your soul to breathe? You don't. You just carry her in the quietest parts of yourself. Not in longing, but in gratitude. Because once she was yours, and more importantly, once you were you with her. And that version of you, the one who felt fully alive, fully seen, fully safe, is the one who will never forget.